Hello, welcome to another Turning Points Checkpoints episode. This is where Corinne and I discuss, certain maybe inspirations from the podcast or realizations or, perspective shifts that we've had or just impacts on our life as we go. I'll just do a quick check-in. How are you doing with the podcast? How are you enjoying some of the latest episodes?
I mean, I love all of it. Monday's my favorite day of the week now.
It is. I don't know if it's my favorite because I have kids, and this is the day I spend the least amount of time with my kids, so I can't say it's my favorite, but I really do look forward to these conversations. They really have turned into a pretty powerful reflective surface for all of this in a lot of different ways. I don't know. Would you agree with that? Or maybe that's...
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we've talked about this before. We enjoy talking about this stuff. And so bringing other perspectives in is just, bringing intentional spiritual conversations, which I love. And I realized I love hearing people's stories and what makes them who they are now. And specifically, I like all people's stories, but specifically the spiritual seeker stories I really love. And for me, I also have a lot of fun, not just on the interview, but figuring out and inviting people and who to have.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I'll listen to a podcast and like, oh, they would be good. And so if you're listening to this right now and you would like to be interviewed, email me or send me a message somehow. Because if you have a seeker story, a turning point story, I'd love to hear from you. And sometimes I need to be reminded. Somebody, like a lot of times I'll just be like I said, listen to a podcast, or I'll just having a conversation with somebody and they'll start talking about the shifts in their life. And I think that would be a great person to interview. Yeah. So that's one of the things that I've really enjoyed about it is really just finding people to be on the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting, the diversity, for sure. I think we probably talked about in the last checkpoints is the diversity but also the commonalities. Some of the things where when you hear, a certain part of somebody's story, you're like, well, I'm not surprised you found growth from that because growth can come out of challenge. I think we start to have, there's a lot of synchronicities or affirmations that are similar, even though they manifest them in different people's lives very differently. So it's been cool to have that, and then also have some particular ones that really shake the feathers, as I could say, of sensibility. I think one of the latest ones, Alea, that you posted, that must have been 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to remember exactly where we are in this new year already, but that one was a particularly shocking, into the present moment. And we were I was in Nashville this last weekend, and we were laughing about it a lot because there's so many little nuances or little moments that went completely over my head. And of course you guys were teasing me, as you should, because it's hilarious. But what's funny about it is like how easy it is to fall out of the present moment or, have an agenda, or in my case, I get caught up in the conversation. And it's like, well, we're having a conversation, so somebody's got to say something, and it might as well be me. And there was a couple of those situations. And while we were talking about that particular podcast this weekend, I was trying to remember what it was that tripped me up out of the awareness, like what tripped me from being present in the moment and capturing this. And I think what was particularly, not difficult, but jarring about the Alea interview was it didn't feel like you're really talking to the same kind of identity that you normally speak to with people. And I feel this way because one thing that's kind of realized is like, well, what's my identity? And obviously this is a Leia, obviously this is a person, but the amount, this is where it gets tough. The amount of awareness, that doesn't seem right, but the presence during that conversation, I find myself almost looking at myself projecting back at me in a lot of ways, or a reflective surface that isn't accepting the finite part of me. And it's just throwing it right back in my face, and I have to deal with it. But it's interesting because I think that's what we kind of do that is and I just did this on the live, I feel like, and I've done this a couple times over the weekend where I'm just all of a sudden go into autopilot, I go into programming mode, and I'm just spitting out parts of my character that are pre-programmed or comfortable or whatever, and I'm not doing this on purpose, but we just expect that the person's going to deal with that. And what's interesting is when you're in a deep conversation where there's a lot of presence, there's a lot of space, the awareness on the other side of the conversation isn't taking any of that. The awareness is not acknowledging any of that because it's not real. And the awareness on the other side of that conversation is, in a way, calling that out. So you're almost like being held accountable in the middle of a conversation, and it just kind of like obliterates the whole identity, the whole persona, the whole character.
Well, I think it can be if you're not used to it. So most of us are when we're having a conversation, we're used to sort of anticipating what we're going to say.
Yes.
Right. And so we're listening to them tell a story or ask a question and we're anticipating. And so once you start being on a more self-aware path, you start to, and especially doing these interviews, like we've really got to focus in and listen, listen and be spontaneous. And so I think when you're first, I've seen this in stages. So when you're first faced with somebody who truly listens, it's unnerving.
Yes.
And I think that's what you're trying to explain. It's unnerving because you're not used to being fully listened to.
Right.
And then I think what happens is you can ramble on, like, because I've done this too. You ramble on because somebody's actually listening to you. So you ramble on because my coaching clients do that to me sometimes. Is like, I'm listening, they'll ramble on. And then all of a sudden you peter out. You do run out of gas.
Yeah.
And then it's like, and then they're just still listening.
Yes. And then they'll do like the Patty thing and say, that's a lot of words. Which in, I think I didn't quite get, I got that at first, but I didn't quite get that until after. It's like, what she's saying is, I just spent a lot of time talking when I could have just been present or using words. That actually is the perfect way to describe it. Is it's almost like being caught with your pants down in the middle of a conversation and you're realizing it and you're trying to pull your pants up as you continue the conversation. But you can't multitask, and you also know that the person saw you with your pants down, so there's no hiding. That's what's, I think, unnerving. And of course, I've been laughing at myself too because I don't really know what the fuck I'm doing here. Like this is a platform that I'm not used to, and I'm very uncomfortable, and it's really opened me up to just talk and just have conversations like we do. And I recognize that sometimes I get caught in the, oh shit, we're recording a podcast, kind of a mode. And it's fine. Like it is fine. And that's what we talked about that this weekend was it's not a problem. It's just funny when you're talking about subjects like awareness and awakenedness and enlightenment, and in that conversation, you're failing to do those things, and the people around you are aware that you're not. And it's it's kind of the cosmic joke, right? I mean, that's the cosmic paradox of all of it is, and that's why enlightenment is to just lighten up, because it's like, oh shit, it's happening, it's happening, it's happening. And Alea did allude to that, is you have to be consciously aware of that immediately, all the time, and just keep coming back to that. And it is a practice, but I've been, so I don't want to say I've been struggling with it. I have been present to that process or that pattern, or I've been present to more and more so when that programming takes over. When the egoic programming or the social programming takes over, I'm becoming, well, part of it is because you guys are putting in my face. I have wonderful people to say, hey, I don't know what the fuck was going on there, but there was a shift, or, there's really good people in my life that are calling that out constantly. My family calls that out on me. My wife and my kids, we're always, right there ribbing each other, and it's a constant awareness. And now it's becoming even more maybe rapid when I realize that's happening, where I can say, what I just told you that's all bullshit. It's all programming, man. It's like, and the only way to, I guess, grow from that is to have more moments of that where,
That's the process.
the process.
It's the apple thing again. It's the same as the apple thing. You first think of an apple, you see the truck. Then you
Right.
think of the apple. I mean, I've said that many times. And then you think of the apple, and someone calls you and says, "Do you want me to pick you up some apples?" And then all of a sudden you think of the apple and it's there. And it's the same thing with this awareness. Is you realize it the next day, and then you realize it a few hours later, and then you realize it 5 minutes after the conversation, and then you realize it in the middle of when you're doing it, and then you stop doing it.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's that. But it's a great distinction. I love that we're talking about this, because some of these things that I've been through, I haven't really been able to put a commentary on it at all, because I certainly have been through this, especially as a teacher, especially teaching awareness yoga that's so specific.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to copy, when I was studying with Rama, you were actually supposed to memorize.
Right.
And I've seen you do it. I've seen, because I did it, and you memorized it from me, and then Brandy memorized it from me, and it's like the words. And then it took me a lot of years to kind of break from that memorization and just go into what I'm feeling and finding my words in a different way, because I've been teaching this kind of yoga now for 26 years.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of years of teaching and finding different words each time and being in the moment. But I am now. Actually, Zoom has helped a lot with that. I don't know why. I guess I can spend my energy, instead of spending my energy running around adjusting people, and I'm really just sitting there and close my eyes, and I'm focused on them, what they might be feeling and doing, and describing it, and being fully present while I'm in the Zoom. And I just feel this flow coming through me now, that is not the automatic words. Because that's when I was getting bored with teaching yoga. It was when the words were automatic all the time.
Right.
Because that's not being authentic, right?
Right.
When you have a political conversation, and it's the same conversation you had with 5 other people, instead of being present and feeling what the other person really, and saying it in a different way, it takes a while to, what am I feeling in this moment, instead of finding those words that you usually go to.
Exactly. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's kind of what kicked off this conversation was, we were having, also we were at the tail end of a 3 or 4 or 5 hour conversation. So it's easy to start to lose energy and peter out. And you posed an excellent, study on litter. You were looking around you, and there's been a lot of litter in Nashville. And, I think not verbatim, but your comment was, who litters? And you were like, it seems like people who are ignored or feel like nobody cares about them litter because they say, well, nobody fucking cares about me, so why should I care? And then just throws it out there. And it was a wonderful thought. And you're kind of just contemplating. And I think I imagine you were posing it because, the next step is, what can we do to not make people feel like they don't matter? What can we do to make people feel valuable in our culture, in our society? I imagine you were probably going to go there.
Yeah, and actually, can I interrupt for a second? As I was thinking, yeah, because the first thing is we've got to get on, the Charlotte Park area thing and tell people not to litter, and because that's the automatic go-to. Let's have some signs: don't litter, and have tickets for people that litter. But punishment doesn't work. It's education and awareness, and even beyond education and awareness, it's value of the self. And so that's sort of the thought process that I went through.
Because if you just say don't litter, you're basically showing you're giving those people that don't feel valued something to focus on that they could do as a rebellion for not feeling, no littering. Fuck that. I'm going to litter.
Right. Because the people that aren't littering, they don't need those signs. And the people that are littering don't like being told what to do. They need love and compassion and understanding, and not pointing the finger.
Right. And that's a great thing to contemplate and try to as a community, figure out ways to make each other feel more valued. That's a great thing. But for some reason, I went political on it, and I just put that in the liberal category in my programming, and I went into the identity of liberal thought process, and then I went into the conservative thought process, and I said, well, I think we need to marry both of them. And you're just like, what the fuck are you talking about? How do we get people to feel valuable? And I from a program state of mind, went to, from a program state, just went political on it. And it wasn't even a political statement. It wasn't like you started with, as a liberal, I feel like our party, the Democrat Party, needs to. It was just simply, this is my localized world. Here's a potential correlation. What's the underlying cause of this problem, and what are some solutions to that? And I actually did the thing that I don't like, which is politicizing it to the degree where the system shuts down and says, well, you're never going to make everybody feel valued, and people need to make themselves feel valued. So it's a moot point. We can't do anything about it. We're just going to have to put a bunch of money into cleaning up the litter. That's what I actually hate. I agree with you, and I like that contemplation. But the next morning, I said, everything I said the last 30 minutes of that was just all political bullshit that I don't really believe. It's just things it's just conversations I keep having that infiltrated my brainstem. And it was kind of fascinating, right? Because you're just like, well, then what do I believe? Or how do I live my life as a mirror or as a reflection? Or how do I be the model for the way I think it should be? How do I be the change that I wish to see in the world? That's where I should have gone, and that's where I like to go. But, more and more, it's like, you get flooded with that programming, and it's... Well,
and like you said, you were tired. We'd been talking for 5 or 6 hours. I think it was the first day you were here. You had just flown in that day, and it was a long day. That's what happens when people go on automatic pilot. And
yes.
Many people are on automatic pilot. Many people are tired. Many people are overloaded. I think about, I was just telling my students in my yoga class the other day, it's like, I know I had to like my family because I, have lived in Nashville or away from my family since I was in my early 20s. And so whenever I would go home, they'd be, whether my sister had kids or my brother had kids or whatever, hanging out with the family, I'd always have to leave at 4 o'clock to go meditate. And I'd go meditate. I'd disappear for an hour, and they resented it at the beginning for a while. They're like, "What? Where's she going?" And it's like I had to refill because I wasn't used to being around that much stimulation.
Right.
And I don't know how working parents do that, especially with young children. It's like, and that's you. It's like, you working to what you have to do every day as an adult, and then you have kids, and then it's meals and bed and attention, and you got to refill the tank. And so what happens is we tend to go into automatic pilot to get through those difficult times instead of excusing yourself to say, I'm going to go meditate.
Yeah.
Or go take a nap or go for a walk or whatever is needed. We just then fall in bed exhausted and then do it all again tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is a very easy pattern to fall back in because I think you have the instant gratification of saying, of a society saying, this is what you should do. You work as hard as you can, you raise your kids, you do this. This is the lifestyle. This is the pattern. And that pattern doesn't have to necessarily change, or those life chores don't have to change after a meditation. Like, you don't have to completely change your lifestyle after, learning meditation or learning a mindfulness practice. It's just that the mindfulness practice changes how you stay mindful in those other moments too, and how you stay present and how you recognize, and again, this is a 100% excusable thing that it's not like I'm chastising myself for having that. What was most interesting about it was paired with these conversations. And that's what's, I think, great about these conversations is this is a wonderful way of keeping me in check constantly, in my practice. Everything that we do, everything that we talk about here teaches me something. And somebody made a kind of a joke about the Say More section and how it's basically just me working out all my shit. And it's true. I mean, it's kind of designed that way. I mean, it's designed for us to go back over the podcast, and right now, or over the past 4 or 5 months, every single podcast gives me a glimpse into something I resonate with that person. And it calls something out of me, and it challenges me. And then I have to go through that process of freaking out for a second and being like, hey, friend, this happened, and I'm going to just talk for about 45 minutes about, how to make sense with this in my world. And what's interesting is what is correlated, and I know I'm doing the thing where I just said I'm just talk for fucking ever, but what's interesting is that I think we had a live session where we talked about getting in the way of your purpose. And one of the things that came up is feeling like a victim, or, feeling like maybe life is against you or whatever. And I tend to scoff at people that play the victim card. They identify with the victim over and over again. It's something that then it creates a comfortable pattern for them. And what I've realized is my victim card is my spiritual struggle. That's something that I throw out and tote, like, oh no, my life's falling apart. I'm freaking the fuck out because somebody just said something profound. And that is happening. But I tend to go into story mode, and then I identify with this new problem, and then I identify with this new problem. And it is part of the process. But lately it's been falling apart a lot quicker for me.
That's
Whereas,
awesome, Sean. It's amazing.
I guess it's a lot of words.
It's a good thing I'm a good listener.
Yes, you are a wonderful listener.
And so are you.
I really am. And I think I get really excited because, not that I don't have a story, but the story isn't as valuable as what's happening right now. I'm starting to know that. Gnosis, Gnosis.
Nice.
I'm starting to know that. And that's what's part of the just have fun with it, because you can have the story and it can be what it is, and we can have the fun and we can talk about it. And it has been extremely cathartic to do this. But then you can retreat back to that gnosis of, well, that's a fun story. I'm doing what you did to me in that mushroom trip. I'm like, all right, you're back in the story. It's like, you know what? I am back in the story because we're fucking here. We're in this reality. We're in this strange illusion.
Well, it doesn't have crazy glue on you anymore.
Right.
It's a little Velcro.
Yes.
But it's not crazy glue. Most people, their stories are like crazy glue. They're just there, their identification. That's what the ego is, the identification with the stories and the way you think things should be and the way that you think things are. That's the thing, is like your perspective is just your perspective. That's been really one of the things that I help people with in my coaching clients is your perspective is just that, your perspective. It's not a truth. It's not the way things are in the world. It's not the way your loved ones think.
Right.
It's like we're all watching a movie and we all have a different perspective of the movie. That's not hard, is it? If we watch a movie, you go to a movie with 10 people and you all come out with a different perspective of the movie. Because we're all different people. We have different backgrounds. We had a different day that day. So cultural differences, whatever it is. Why can't we then have a different perspective in life, every single one of us? And then my one coaching client, she would argue that. She'd go, well, there are just truths in the world. Like there's moral ways that things should be. And I mean, that's a tough one because, yeah, culturally we are, we can't murder people and steal. But her thing would be like, well, if you give somebody a gift, you should call them or write them a card.
Yeah.
Or if a client calls you, you should get back to them the same day. Or, like there's these things. And what people have to understand is that everybody has different rules for these things. Like, yes, as a society, we have this rule about stealing and murder. Okay, and there's probably some other things that I'm not thinking of, but we do have some cultural guidelines and rules. But other than that, it's like all you have to do is go visit another culture and see that their culture is completely different. It's like slurping your food and burping and farting in our culture is not acceptable in public. Okay? Right. In some families it is, but in public it is not. In India, if you don't slurp your food, like literally pick up your plate and go at the end, that is rude if you don't do it.
Yes.
And if you burp and fart and even throw up in public, that is perfectly acceptable in India. No, I mean, people, they buy this, it's called vomitiva, little thing that clears out the digestion. And I've had people, they take it at the pharmacy, like we're standing in the street, and then they throw up right beside me. And there was, okay.
That's quite gross. But your point is made. Your point is these are, it is just true for you that this is rude. It's just true for you that this is unacceptable. And that's what I think, when you take it into that global scale, there are countries that think and operate very, very different politically, socially,
Polygamy in our country.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, within our country. There's a lot of different ways to look at it. And
you're allowed for it to be morally not okay for you. Like you're allowed to have a personal opinion about it that, oh, that wouldn't work for me. But what you're not allowed to do is have a judgment against that person.
Yes.
That's where the thou shalt not judge to me thing comes in.
Yes.
You can have a moral compass for yourself that doesn't work for you personally. That's cool. Whatever you want, whatever guidelines you want, you're allowed to have your perspective. But don't project any of it on anybody else.
Yeah.
That's what
Which we do
all the time. It's like we keep expecting us to show up in other people. Well, how boring would that be if everybody was a bunch of Corinnes? That would be pretty fucking boring.
You're cool.
Yeah, but we there's only one of me, and thank God, I mean,
maybe after 10 it'd get a little bit more. But yes, exactly. It's, it just creates more separateness when you project that out. When you project outwardly that, well, you need to do it my way. It's like, well, it's kind of the littering thing. Like, when you do that, you're actually driving a wedge because you're belittling that person's perspective. You're putting your perspective on top of their perspective and saying mine's more valuable than yours. And that's not really sharing perspectives. That's shoving your perspective in somebody's face, forcefully trying to get them to adhere to that. It is possible, and this is one of the more fun things I like to do, is have perspective sharing events where, and that happens a lot, and it can devolve really quickly if everybody's not on the same page that, hey, we're just spitballing here. This is just how I'm looking at it. And when you do that and you put these different perspectives in, you start to tweak your own, because you're like, man, I never thought of it that way. That really resonated with me. But I had to put my perspective away for a second, just for a second. I don't have to get rid of it. I just say, let me listen to your perspective. Let me hear why. And if you go to India and they say, why is it rude? Why is it rude not to burp? Well, from their perspective, that means, I'm assuming, that you enjoyed the meal and that you're fulfilled, right? That's something
it's slurp, not to burp. It's slurp if you don't slurp, because you're finishing your food.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
They don't like you to waste food.
Yeah.
I'm assuming from the slurp. Okay.
I don't know. We'll have to ask an Indian about fully that. It just means you're really enjoying it. Like you're really enjoying it. You're finishing it to the last drop. Maybe finishing it all is, yeah.
Yeah. So if you listen to that person say, or even ask the question, why is it rude not to slurp your food? And they say, well, it makes me feel like you're really enjoying the meal, or whatever it is. And then you're like, oh shit, that makes sense. And now you can be like, well, I'm not going to slurp my food any other time, but when I'm at your house, I'll slurp my food. And that's okay. I like the when in Rome, context. It's like, well, I'm here, I'm in your space, you're the one serving me. I could at least honor.
And that's what India is so good at. Like in India, when anybody I talk to in India, if I'm talking about something or they see something about me that's different, and they'll say, oh, that's just part of your culture. And they will never, ever put anybody else's culture down. Mm. They're always accepting, even though like they would never think of sex before marriage, most Indians. I mean, some certainly these days, but in the traditional culture, but they're okay with me doing it because that's just part of my culture.
Gotcha.
They don't have any judgment about it. I mean, that's pretty beautiful. And stop everything. Let's go back to that. What, perspective sharing? Well, you said everybody's doing this perspective sharing. Who?
Oh, no. I like it. I'm sorry. I like it when I have like little groups of people.
Do you call it that? I mean, it's a great name.
Oh, I don't know. It's just, I have some really great people in my life. Well, just this weekend, you, Colleen, and I were just hanging out. Yeah, she makes fun of you about some of your things. You make fun of her. We all kind of tease each other to a certain degree about, like, well, I'm probably not going to do things that way, but I'm going to honor that you do things that way. And when we have this like melting pot, there really isn't the agenda to change each other's minds per se. It's more of I trust and respect that you are present to your perspective, that you'll offer your perspective, but you'll also offer it without this overarching theme that your perspective is better than mine.
Right. Or trying to change
Yeah.
your
So
perspective. Yeah. Yeah.
we have conversations like that. I have some really good conversations with my cousins, some of extended family members, where it's just like, where are you at? Where? How do you feel about this? And unfortunately, we've been talking mostly about politics over the last year, and that gets funny because you're just really pointing out the negatives or the differences. But there's often times where I just have wonderful, basically philosophical sharing, and really what I think comes down to most of the perspectives are they're only different in the words we're using to describe them. But it starts to feel very obvious that we're having a similar experience internally. It's just the way we would describe it or the way it manifests in our life is different. But you don't know that until you talk openly. And, it's really hard. It's really hard to get somebody to share their full, honest perspective in a deep way unless you're going to put your weapons down, unless you're going to drop, your perspective.
Defenselessness. My favorite word, defenselessness.
I like that.
I use it in almost every situation for everything. I've specifically used it. I've had 3 emails in my life that have come to me. 3? I can think of 3 off the top of my head that have come to me from people that I love who have ripped a new one, like just called me the worst person on the planet, tore me up. I couldn't even read the entire email of these. And this is, the last one I got was 12 years ago. So this is in my past, right? And these people's perspective of me, of just like I'm the worst person on the planet and I'm a fake and a phony and all that. And Deepak's word, defenselessness. And that's when it's hardest. But in all 3 of those situations, I was able to just get the gist of the email, read sort of overall the arcing of it. I don't need that shit in my brain. And then respond if it's needed to. In 2 of the instances, no, in 1 instance I responded, in 2 I just didn't even respond. 1 instance I did have something to apologize for, 1 thing out of the 25 things. And I apologized for that 1 thing, and that was it. Didn't try to explain it. And so then that let that die. I didn't give it any energy, right? And so those are specific situations in my life that I've used, and I've used it many other ways, but those are like difficult situations.
Yeah.
Because if you just give something energy when you try to defend a point of view or a situation.
Yeah, well, especially in that situation where all you would mostly be doing would be trying to get them to see your point, and there's certain times where it's obvious that the other person is not going to or wanting to or even in any space to hear somebody else's perspective, and then so fine,
and that's okay.
And that's
that is your perspective. I honor that, even though it's pointed right at me. And I know that I can't change that, or it would take a lot of effort to change 1% of it. It's not worth, if you see that in me, that's your, and I also have had other people, I haven't had this a lot in my life. I'm talking the last 40 years, there's happened 3 times. And there's one other situation where it happened was before email. And, she told me off, hung up on me. And 2 years later, she apologized.
Yeah. It takes time.
And sometimes people don't ever come around. Like those other 3 I'm talking about, they haven't come around, and that's okay with me.
Yeah. Well, it's obviously not good for both of you to stay in that environment. And that's something that I've really struggled with, is trying to force those situations and saying, no, we can work, or no, it can work. If you would just see it my way, we could work. Or bend completely and apologize for things that are out of my control and go, straight
Go the other way.
Empath and say, okay.
Or victim.
And yeah, exactly. And I'm starting to realize, I guess, where a lot of the cracks are, or where a lot more of the facade is, and where so much of me is dying now. So much of that extra stuff that you're talking about, so much of that, well, no, there's another perspective here. And if you just hear me out, or it's like, oh, you know what? I want this to work so bad that I will give into everything on your side, no matter what. And that's not the right answer. And it has not been the right answer for me. And it's kept me stuck in a lot of situations where had I just said, you know what? This is the truth as I see it, but I'm not going to project that on you. I'm gonna operate from a defenselessness state. It would have served me greatly. But that's the learning, that's the learning part of it. And that's the gift here is, kind of falling apart, maybe piece by piece every week on this podcast after X amount of years of falling apart. There's a lot to deconstruct. And when you start to reflect, that's just the beginning of the deconstruction part of this journey. And I was not fully prepared for how much dismantling goes on.
How much dismantling was that? You didn't realize how big that house was. It was a mansion with a lot of dismantling.
Fucking huge. It was enormous. And I've loved dearly and been attached to so many pieces of architecture in my own being.
I used to call it over the years with friends, like peeling away the layers of the onion, but no, deconstruction is a much better word. There's so much more than the onion. There's so many more rooms.
Oh my God. There's a guest house, there's a stable, there's these little tucked, these buildings on site that are not attached to the main that
and then as you're deconstructing, there's more construction going on.
Yeah. It's trying to rebuild itself while I'm trying to break it down, man. It's like,
oh, and this is the path.
Yeah. Well, because you try to remodel. Well, I don't need to blow it up. I just need to remodel. I just need to tweak. I need to put a different color paint on it. It's like it all.
And that's what the ego does. That's what the ego does. Like every crack and corner it can get to is you can deconstruct it. It's constructing. But I will share with you the good news. That's the bad news or the funny news. That's why you have to laugh at it. But what Alea shared with me. So I've been doing private sessions. Well, I've done one private session with Alea after we had that podcast with her. She does satsang every Wednesday night online on Zoom. And I have yoga every Wednesday night. So then I saw on the website she does do private sessions. So I reached out, and what she left me with, and then I heard it again in a book I was reading listening to. So she said, as you're deconstructing, your thoughts, ideas, your self-image, your ego. She says it's almost like a Jenga game. The Jenga game where you pull out the blocks.
Yes.
And you pull out the blocks and she said you don't need to deconstruct the whole thing. You just need to pull out a few key, and then it's just the structure isn't strong enough to hold anymore.
Right.
And that stayed with me all week. And then I was listening to a book, actually Untamed by Glennon Doyle, that a lot of people, every woman should read. And every man should read too, I guess. It's a wonderful book. And she talks about how, this was Elizabeth Lesser in the Elizabeth Lesser interview. Anyways, Glennon Doyle's Untamed is great. Elizabeth Lesser is amazing too. Her podcast, though, she did an interview with Tim Ferriss, and she talked about a dam. Like so he said, what at the end of their interview, he said, do you want to, what can you leave the people with? What's the last parting words that you have to say? And she said, I've been like an extreme, person my whole life. She said, I've done everything 110%. I've lived in a commune, and she's the one that founded, Omega Institute. And she said, psychedelics, I went in full force. She said, everything I've done full board. And she said, now with my age and my maturity and just also the work, she said, just be kind, be gentle to yourself. And she said, you don't have to break down the dam. Just pull out a couple of branches. Just pull out a couple of branches, and then eventually you pull out the key branches, the beaver dam the river will go of consciousness will flow right through.
Well, and I think that's a wonderful metaphor, both those metaphors, really, because it showcases how fragile the ego construction really is. It's not really that secure.
That's why people with strong egos are so insecure.
Yeah. Because, and the Jenga, I love that, because, right, you never lose that game when all the other pieces are gone. It's always when it becomes too fragile to support itself. And I imagine we're all headed to that point, one way or another, this life or the next life. It's finite, the ego is. So it's kind of destined.
It's not only finite, it's built on illusion.
Yeah, that's not a solid foundation. That sounds like the stock market. Yeah. It's finite and it's founded on illusion. Yeah.
This has been a good conversation.
Yeah. Who knew we had it in us?
And we were both tired tonight, right?
Oh, I was exhausted.
Yeah. You're drinking both coffee and whiskey.
Yeah.
I'm drinking, I had mate today.
Spinning.
Yeah. But no, we went to some cool places. It was fun. Thank you.
Oh, man. Thank you. Thank you for enduring my bullshit. I don't know where you come from, and I you've been there, and I really appreciate it.
As Alea says, I am you.
Well, it just hurts even more. That's powerful.
Yeah.
That is very powerful.
Yeah. I was going to say one more thing, and I forgot. Guess not that important. Oh, I was going to say, subscribe. Most people who are listening to this have already subscribed, but it's really important. I want to start encouraging people to make comments and feedback and likes and stuff, because especially if you're listening on the podcast app, we need people to make comments and interact with us and give reviews so that other people can find us.
Yes, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, that would be really important. So thank you. If you're listening to this, thank you. We love you. We appreciate you. This is the reason why we're doing it.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly the reason. Well, I do it because I think this was all designed and meant for me. But if anybody else gets some kind of enjoyment out of it, well, that's just a bonus.
It is.
No, it's wonderful to interact this way. I'm glad we have anybody listening, and I hope people are finding this helpful, enjoyable, maybe a little bit funny. That's all we could really hope for.
Good night.
Good night.